Hey everyone! Today I want to talk about Rushmore from 1998 by Wes Anderson. This is the 50th episode of my 1,000 Favorite Movies series, where I talk about the movies I love the most in a random order. I hate to admit it, but sorry, I'm not a big Wes Anderson fan. Who knows, this might change as I rewatch some of his movies, and I haven't seen his last few ones to be honest, as of this video, but I have some major problems with him that I can't look past. I don't necessarily mind quirkiness, but it feels especially irksome to me in his films, especially when it obliterates everything else in its wake, so we're left with something that we're supposed to regard as cute and kooky, without knowing why we're supposed to care. The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou was the peak of that for me. This leads to an even bigger problem, where after really finding and honing his oddball and unique style, I get the sense that he got consumed by it, so that his later movies feel completely mannerless and affected, as cold and distant as a sterile empty room, using an overwhelming abundance of famous actors to mask the lack of a human pulse. Isle of Dogs is a prime example of what I mean by that. But maybe I'm reading him totally wrong, and I just need to give him more chances. After all, I quite like the Royal Tenenbaums and the Darjeeling Limited, but my favorite without a doubt is Rushmore, which is just fantastic. It's great because it has the best elements of his unique style, with none of the problems I mentioned above. This was his second feature, but the first to integrate what everyone knows as Wes Anderson's signature formal style, but it's not overkill here. In fact, I think this movie represents his direction at its best. An extremely well-paced, likable, massively entertaining comedy, with characters who are quirky yet real, and with a fun visual sense that's enveloping rather than distancing. One of the miracles of this movie is the main character, Max Fisher, played by a nearly unrecognizable Jason Schwartzman in his first movie role. He's a miracle because normally, he'd be a character that I'd absolutely loathe. He's a supremely cocky, arrogant little dweeb who thinks he can do anything and treat anyone like garbage, and expects to be liked in return. And while there are of course times where I truly disliked his behavior and wanted him to receive a harsh comeuppance, he's actually charming, if not likable on the whole, at least more than he has any right to be. This is partly due to Schwartzman, who buys into Max's character so much that he becomes a kind of exaggerated cartoon character. So even though he may be a jerk, we can't truly hate him because he's like on a different plane of reality, to be judged by a different standard than everyone else. You know what I mean? Just the fact that he seemingly has unlimited time to be involved with all his extracurricular activities suggests that he's not even human, and isn't aware of what is and isn't socially acceptable. Perhaps this is why his best friends for most of the film include a kid that's a few years younger than him, a millionaire CEO of a company, and an elementary school teacher. Until the end where he befriends a classmate named Margaret Yang, he literally has no friends his own age or in his own class. Maybe he doesn't know how to connect with them. There's also the wonderfully witty and clever writing, and to me his funniest lines involve the delusions that he's older and wiser than he actually is. Perhaps the most outrageous example is when he meets his teacher crush's friend. He's introducing the CEO to him, and he says, "I didn't catch this young gentleman's name." He says things like, "War does funny things to men," and "My safety's Harvard." Even though his grades are bad, that sound preposterous, but they really work as delivered. Then there's a couple of these types of lines that are funny, yet show a sadder side. When he's talking with his dad about how he's not good with girls, his dad says, "You're like one of those clipper ship captains. You're married to the sea." Max responds by saying, "Yes, that's true, but I've been out to sea for a long time." Later in the film, after he starts working for his dad, he's told, "I always thought you'd try another line of work. You talked about being a senator or a diplomat." He says, "Pipe dreams, Dad. I'm a barber's son." These half-funny, half-touching moments, for a character who doesn't deserve our sympathy on the surface, show the depth of the writing, as well as Wes Anderson's sympathy for his characters. Max is the best character in the film, but Bill Murray comes in a close second as Herman Bloom, the millionaire CEO. He is probably one of my favorite comedic actors, because at his best, he combines his natural comedic talents with a kind of world weariness that's easy for us to get behind, and this might be one of his best expressions of that. Despite his success, he basically hates his situation, with his wife that might be cheating on him and his two kids that he can't relate to at all, and so he unexpectedly falls in with Max and becomes one of his friends, even at one point acting as his messenger. We get childlike behavior as well during these missions, like when he suddenly runs away after delivering a letter to the teacher, like a kid who's shy and has a crush. I don't know how realistic this is, especially when he literally signs away the majority of his fortune to Max to build an aquarium, but maybe he just wants to act like a kid again, especially since the adult life isn't making him happy. And like kids, both Herman and Max fall in love with Miss Cross, the elementary school teacher, played by Olivia Williams. She becomes friends with Max, but she has to set some boundaries early on when Max seems to try to take the relationship a step further. In being his friend, she meets Herman, who eventually warms up to her and falls in love with her like Max has. If this isn't the strangest love triangle in movie history, I don't know what is. Anyway, Rosemary Cross might be the most believable character in the film, and so we root for her to be happy possibly the most. Maybe this situation sounds overly quirky in a manner like I described at the beginning of the video, but it plays like the farthest thing from it. It earns this setup by being so well written, brilliantly acted, and deftly developed, especially in the evolution of Herman's feelings towards Miss Cross, and, spoiler alert, how their affair starts and ends. Max may be in love with her more, but Herman presents a more suitable option due to his age and experience, and so that's the way it flows. But she realizes that his personality leaves something to be desired, so she ends it. It all feels so honest. I also love how all three main characters have traumatic past experiences, which helps to explain how these three bruised souls ended up together. The dynamic between them is the highlight of the film, but let's not forget about the other characters. Max's dad is played by the always great Seymour Cassell. The school headmaster is played by Brian Cox, and there's a memorable Scottish bully who loves to pick on him, along with Dirk, the kid who's basically Max's assistant. All of these characters work well by themselves, but the world that they create and represent is where the real soul of this movie lies, I think. There's an interconnectedness to the characters despite their differences that's difficult to put my finger on, but it has something to do with their unity across various ages. Basically, every age group is represented and are allowed to become involved with each other as if there's nothing unusual about it. I mean, there's a scene where Dirk, who can't be more than 10, confronts a grown-ass, nearly 50-year-old man about his affair with like a 30-year-old woman on behalf of a 15-year-old, and we don't think twice about it. It all comes together in the final sequence, where just about every character, major and minor, comes to Max's play that he puts on, and they all interact during the after-party. The final shot of the movie perfectly captures this community. We have Max dancing with Rosemary in the middle, Herman dancing with Max's new girlfriend on the right, his dad dancing with his teacher on the left, and in a moment of genius, just before the curtain closes, Dirk wheels in the headmaster on the left. It's genius because there's no reason he needs to be here at this moment at the dance, but Anderson generously gives him a tiny little moment to make an appearance anyway. This sense of community is what makes this movie such a treasure to watch, I think. As are the beginnings of Anderson's unique style. Many of the compositions are flat, as in they look like they're done parallel to us on a 2D plane. I guess kind of like a South Park episode, to put it crudely. This is demonstrated very well in the montage near the beginning of all the clubs Max is in, which are composed almost like postcards. It's very stylishly done and refreshing to watch, but crucially, there are many shots that break with this style, and so the world not only feels like a realistically portrayed one, but it also doesn't feel one note like some of his later movies do that rigidly stick to these symmetrical compositions. There's a great balance here. And as is the tradition with Wes Anderson, there's a lively soundtrack to complement the fun atmosphere. The original songs composed for the movie are charming, but the most memorable musical moments are from a series of British rock groups. I love The Who, for example, so the song of theirs that plays is a highlight, but maybe my favorite sequence apart from that is Here Comes My Baby by Cat Stevens. Now let me talk about my favorite moments. Speaking of music, I have to mention the scene where Herman is at his son's birthday party by a nasty green pool that no one uses. It's weird because if they're so rich, why can't they afford a clean pool? But it fits perfectly here, because it matches Herman's uncaring attitude and disconnectedness from everything around him. Set to a Kinks song, we can just feel his self-loathing and his childish need for attention when he does a cannonball into the pool. I also like how the scene functions in the structure of the film, because it lets us know that the movie isn't just about Max, but it's also about Herman, knowing that his character is nearly as interesting. But back to Max, my next favorite scene is when he talks to Miss Cross for the first time. He starts by surprising her from behind and lighting her cigarette. He then sits away from her in the back on the other side of the bleachers. What follows after they start talking is Max moving back and forth, towards and away from her, finally ending up right next to her. I love it because it hilariously shows his awkwardness, but the dialogue shows him trying so hard to impress her with his adult speak. One of my favorite lines also comes in the scene. She says that her thesis was on Latin American economic policy, and he says, "Did you hear they're not going to teach Latin here anymore?" She corrects him, "This was more like Central America." Then he says pretentiously, "Oh, Central America and whatnot. But moving on, they're going to cancel Latin." The audaciousness of him to say, "moving on," makes me laugh. And speaking of funny lines, I like when the Scottish bully says, Got any good hand jobs lately? Finally, there's a small moment in the movie that feels epic and violent, even though it probably isn't. It's in the headmaster's office, with the painting of him in the background. They start to argue up close, and when Max lets out a yell, we cut to a close-up of the picture to the sound of a fire starting or something, and the shadows move that make it seem at first glance like a fire is violently raging. It's all so sudden. But in the end, what I love about Rushmore is that it's easily my favorite Wes Anderson movie as of now, displaying and fully utilizing many different talents, including the writing, directing, and acting. Similar to Elephant, which is the last movie I reviewed, it's a high school movie that manages to be totally unique, and in this case is to do with the rich characters from different walks of life and the world that's created by them. It's such a fun, warm, yet ultimately touching movie that makes me suspect that I might have been obsessed with it if I saw this when I was younger. I might have recognized the Godfather parody sooner at least, which is so subtle that I completely missed it until my latest viewing. Anyway, I love it now, and so it's one of my 1,000 favorite movies. Thanks for watching my video. Goshou makoto ni arigatou gozaimasu. Have you seen Rushmore? Let me know what you think in the comments. I think of all my favorite movies as my friends, and I think of my audience as friends too. Remember, I upload a new video every Friday, so if you want to help me complete this 1,000 favorite movies epic, don't forget to like and subscribe.